looking for every possible voter. Welcome to Columbus on the Record. We won't know for 2.5 weeks if the polls are correct, but as of right now, a razor-thin margin separates the presidential candidates and the Senate candidates here in Ohio. In the presidential race, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris continue to basically fly over Ohio as they bounce back and forth between Pennsylvania and Michigan. This week, Harris went on Fox News for a tough interview. Donald Trump played DJ and enjoyed 40 minutes of music at an odd town hall. Both campaigns continued to make very specific appearances aimed at motivating very specific voters. Brian Rutherford, you've watched a lot of campaigns. You've lived in Michigan. What's going to be the difference in these swing states, in particular Michigan?
Well, in Michigan, as in most places, it's going to be voter turnout and who gets their folks out to vote and what the intensity behind them is. So, you know, it's unclear with polling these days how the polling takes hold. What I will say is the intensity behind the Harris campaign still is maintained in many of the base communities, and that's going to help. But she's going to have to get her message out, and she's going to have to be spending a lot of time in Michigan and Pennsylvania, and she's going to have to narrow her field to a couple of the key states. I know there's some other periphery states, but it's going to have to really intensify on a few states she needs to win.
Are those the three so-called blue wall states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin?
I think so, although you might be able to throw North Carolina in, and that's probably in play mostly because of the governor that they have running on the ballot who shouldn't even be on that ballot, but that sort of softens, that kind of softens that race. So,
Mike, President Trump, of course, he's been barnstorming as much as Kamala Harris is. The problem with his is he's undisciplined. He gets off message at these rallies and kind of goes off on tangents. Is that going to affect his race at all?
No, I think that's what people actually like. They don't like to be to have to sit there and listen to a read campaign speech, right? I think Kamala does that really well. She reads a speech as opposed to just talking. So if you like Trump, you like what he does. If you don't, you don't. But my good friend Andrew Tobias on an annual basis tweets out his prediction, and it says it all comes down to turnout, close quote. and I love reading it every year. Great job, sir. But it does. But if you look at the base in the states like you mentioned, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, voter enthusiasm is on our side, the Republican side. I think when the cost of groceries, the economy, immigration issues, you're going to see a suppression in voters. Look, Tim Walz is not appealing to inner city voters, whether they be African American, Hispanic, middle income, low income voters. He's just not. That's why you haven't seen him much the last 2 weeks. And Kamala's not resonating either. She's trying desperately to go on to shows and radio programs, morning drives, and it's just not working and resonating. Look, the economy's bad, and when the economy's bad, the party out of power usually gets back in.
Andrew, looking at the polls, I went back and looked at 2020, and Michigan, Joe Biden, the day before Election Day, led Michigan by 8 points. He led Wisconsin by 8 points. He led Pennsylvania by 5. He won all of those states, but like by 1 or 2 points. I mean, how accurate do you think these polls are this year in capturing that hidden Trump vote we saw in 2016 and 2020?
Yeah, I'm not paid as well as a pollster, and so I'm also not a pollster. The big question is, I do know that pollsters have tried to address what happened in 2020 and fix it. And so the question is, are the polls biased against Trump, or are they biased against a close race? Obviously we could have some other sort of bias that appears now. But so I just don't know what the answer to that question is. But I'm not necessarily assuming that you can just add 5-6 points to Trump's numbers, but we'll see. Like I said, I'm not a pollster, and it's really hard to tell.
Yeah, some states they were pretty much. I think Georgia was very close, but a lot of these states, Brian, they were way off. So that's why
they are. I mean, part of it is they had to take a look at how they were doing their polling, how much they were doing online. There's a distrust of answering questions about politics. Part of the post-Trump era on both sides is that there's people are afraid to say who they're for because it gets so contentious right now. I do think that, Harris is actually doing a lot and appealing a lot in communities and dealing with the economy. And I don't know that Trump is really doing much to move numbers. I mean, well, I didn't really like his music selection, but I mean, that was just a weird, you got to go up there and sell yourself and not just sit there and dance on stage. Or was that dancing on stage? I don't know what you call that.
Swaying. It was swaying.
Swaying.
But the people that show up at a Kamala rally is voting for Kamala. People that show up at a Trump rally, he's not convincing or swaying voters at a rally. You show up because you support the guy.
But that
or
got a
the
lot
gal.
of coverage, and if people are concerned about his age and they see that, much like they were concerned about Biden's age before he dropped out, that has to give supporters of Donald Trump pause.
I don't think so. Age is just a number. If you have cognitive ability and you have energy, no one works harder than Donald Trump. He's up, he doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, obviously doesn't do those types of things and works hard. So I don't think that's an issue for him. I know the media is trying to do it, but I can assure you, Mike, single moms don't care about his cholesterol levels. They care about being able to afford groceries.
But if Joe Biden he'd been up there and swayed around for 40 minutes, it would have been a talking point for Republicans.
Talking about it a lot.
Well, if he was stumbling and bubbling as he usually does, then yes, it would be.
Donald Trump says January 6th was a day of love. That does not match the video that everybody saw.
No, it certainly doesn't. I wasn't there. I don't think anyone around this table was there either, but I don't think that is an accurate reflection.
So, are people going to forget what they saw on January 16th, January 6th?
When I say this respectfully, Mike, there was things that happened on that day there that nobody wants to see, but people don't care anymore. People that hate Donald Trump care, but the average Ohioan American that can't afford things they used to be able to afford don't care about January 6, 2020.
Yeah,
they
but
just
those
don't.
housewives do care about things like abortion and the fact that he's made it very clear he will support legislation that will take away their choices, especially on that
Baloney.
issue.
He said just the opposite, much to my chagrin. I wish he didn't say that, but he said just the opposite as it relates to abortion.
He said it's
he would veto any bans or anything like that. Again, I'm on the other side, and I'm telling you, he doesn't agree with me on that issue. So change the talking point because it's not accurate.
I'm not changing my talking point
well, you
because
should.
it's been very clear.
The bottom line is he did appoint the 3 Supreme Court justices that led
And
to the
bragged about it.
overturning of Roe versus Wade and said that he was responsible for that. So that's
And then down in Florida, he changed his tune completely on the ballot issue.
Andrew, to the undecideds. Are there undecideds any left? I find it hard to believe there's any undecideds left. It's either are you going to vote, or you're going to stay home, or maybe are you going to vote for third party?
Well, so back to the polls again. I mean, they're just, it's remarkable how they're showing this 1% margin in these states where we had 1% margins or less before. The undecided percentage of the electorate, it's like 2-3% in some of those states. I mean, we're talking about thousands of people, or maybe tens of thousands. So there are people like us who sit and think about politics 24/7. There are some people who are like, oh, is there an election coming up? And those are the people they're trying to reach. They're not engaged with this stuff. I mean, they have more important things to worry about in their lives. So it's when you talk to people like that, I mean, it's just voters kind of defy expectations from people who just like us who sit and talk about it for a living.
Brian, on Kamala Harris, it's still a new campaign. It's only been a few months,
Right?
But she only has 2 weeks left. In a normal campaign, you have the first couple of months of being a candidate. You catch fire. You're the hot new thing. And then sometimes those candidates fade away. Is that a danger for Kamala Harris, that people just haven't gotten enough from her yet? They're not quite sure. They're not going to vote for her?
I think that where she's at right now is where the race sort of settles down and it's even in a lot of these different states. I think the reason that they are battleground states is they were going to be even to begin with. I mean, once their version of our issue 1 passed in Michigan, even their legislature is pretty much 50-50 and up for grabs every single cycle. What you're seeing from her is trying to define herself and get her vote out. But it's really going to be about base turnout at this point. There's a little bit of swing voter out there, but it's going to be about base voters and turnout.
All right. The U.S. Senate race between Sherrod Brown and his challenger, Bernie Moreno, is the most expensive in Ohio history. Brown raised $31 million in just the last 3 months. That was far more than the $6.5 million Moreno raised. But it really doesn't matter because the Moreno side is actually outspending the Brown side on TV and video advertising. That's because outside groups supporting Moreno are making up the difference, and that's why we are seeing grainy videos of the candidates every time we watch TV or click on a YouTube video. Mike Onadakis, at this point, and I know we're paying more attention than other folks, but even folks who are casual observers, are seeing these ads over and over again. Are they losing their effectiveness? Are they making a difference anymore?
You know, again, we're in the weeds, as Andrew said, guys like us around this table, but I think they do lose their effectiveness, you know, and you have to do them, you know, you have to be on TV, but, you know, I mean, I'm not watching them, I'm glossing over, fast forwarding, you know, you got to watch live sports, so that's where the moneymaker is, of course. I think they do lose their effectiveness, but, you know, no amount of money is going to be able to, in my opinion, save Sherrod Brown. He's been in office for over 30 years. Your production crew weren't even born when he got elected, you know, I mean, over 30 years. And I think people are just sick and tired of it, and they want change. Look, if Trump's going to win by 8 or more, which he will, it's statistically impossible for Sherrod to get across the finish line. But to the matter of ads and money, Tim Ryan had over $50 million, and J.D. Vance beat him by 7 points. So at the end of the day, there's no amount of money that's going to save Sherrod Brown.
Well, obviously, Mike DeWine has been around even longer than Sherrod Brown when it comes to being on the ballot. And that wasn't an issue, so it wasn't your talking point the last time we had an election here in this state. But what I would say about this is he has consistently run getting Trump Brown voters at least 6 to 7 points. That hasn't changed. And as long as he continues along that line, those are locked in. And as long as the margin with Trump remains where it is, he's going to win. Statistically, he can win, and he is winning in many polls.
Andrew, what is the issue that will make the difference in this race, do you think, when you talk to voters and talk to the campaigns? Is it immigration? Is it abortion rights? Is it the economy?
It's really hard to pin it down to an issue that will make the difference. It's clear I think it's kind of common sense, but again, like polling, while flawed, is very, very clear that the economy is the #1 issue on voters' minds. Now, what does that mean to that individual person? There are slices of the economy, but I think that's kind of the water that everybody's swimming in right now.
Transgender issues is the #1 attack point, I would say, against Sherrod Brown, by the outside groups in particular. But here are some statistics. 1% of the American population identifies as transgender. There are maybe a half dozen athletes in Ohio high school sports, 6 or so, that compete, transgender athletes that compete on another team. Why is this even an issue? I mean, it affects so few people. No one should be discriminated against. I'm not saying that. But it affects such a small sliver of our population, and it's really not, as far as athletes go, it's not an issue at all.
Because parents care about their daughters deeply. Moms do, dads do, single moms do, single dads do. At the end of the day, if you're spending $500 million, whatever the total number is, you're doing focus groups, you're doing polling, and you're asking Ohio voters, what are the issues that matter to you? They're not just throwing darts at a dartboard and say, oh, let's run this ad. This is all strategic. And when you ask Ohio voters, parents, if you care about your daughter and the odds of her playing against another boy, they're like, heck no, we don't want that.
Why is it? I mean, so first of all, it's a parental decision. Transgender kids have existed in this state for a long time. When it comes to bathroom policies, schools for 126 years have been able to manage bathroom hall passes. This has not been a big issue. There have been no surgeries. The governor himself said that last week. There's only one reason this happened. In Virginia, it was brought up as a swing issue. That's the Virginia governor, who was a Republican, rode that issue to be able to win. They are basically bullying and creating an issue over a subset of people in this state, in all states. I was up north. They were running them against a Democratic congressional candidate. They were running them against Kamala Harris. They are making this issue into an issue that is not affecting people at all. And one last thing, 30% of transgender kids have been reported to have had suicidal thoughts that they reported in. This is awful.
The other issue is abortion rights, Andrew, and that's squarely aimed at basically suburban women. And this week you saw Sherrod Brown on Friday was in basically Delaware County, sort of Powell area. Bernie Moreno was in Westerville on Friday, targeting these suburban areas, trying to get out the vote, doing, get out the vote rallies and things like that. And you see it in the ads. They're featuring suburban-looking women.
Yeah, and that's, again, I go back to the polling, which is what sort of informs me, because that's what the campaigns are also looking at. There's a gender divide. Generally, men are more likely to vote Republican, women are more likely to vote for Democrats. There's a reason why when Bernie Moreno made the comments he did about single-issue women voters in the suburbs, that Brown's campaign cut that into an ad. It's why he's having a road show, basically talking about it whenever he can. So, it's an area that Brown's trying to pick up. Somebody like Bernie Moreno is trying to stem the damage, and it's just the kind of things that campaigns do. They're competing for the same types of voters.
Again, it shows you the narrowness of of the margins here. Anyway, leading supporters and opponents of Issue 1 met for a debate this week. The proposed redistricting amendment would create a 15-member independent commission to draw legislative and congressional districts. As much as they disagree on the fix, both former Supreme Court Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor and State Auditor Keith Faber say what Ohio is doing now ain't working.
What was sold to the people in 2015 and 2018 was billed as the answer to eliminate gerrymandering. It does just the opposite. Now, why does it do just the opposite? And I've used this analogy over and over again, that both 15 and 18 had embedded in those amendments, I call it the Trojan horse. The Trojan horse is the makeup of the Redistricting Commission, 7 politicians. And 7 politicians who are interested in putting party over people, creating maps that will enhance their power.
I'll be the first one to say the current system doesn't work very well. This system will make it worse. And it will make it worse because effectively what you're doing is taking the rules that traditionally you use to draw geographical districts and turning them on their head. What you're doing is taking concepts like compactness and keeping communities together and making them subservient to this concept of proportionality. Well, here's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. Ohioans don't live proportionally.
Andrew Tobias, the yes side has the money advantage. They're running the ads. No side, not as many ads. People generally like gerrymandering, don't like gerrymandering, want to do away with gerrymandering. What will be the difference in this race, do you see?
On some level, I mean, I see signs of voters not clearly understanding what this is about. And if they're in fact seeing these ads, it's probably going to push them towards yes. But it is a question, too, if they're going to see the ads because of all of the Senate ads that are airing alongside of them, it might drown them out. You know, I was talking to another reporter today, and they said that the kinds of search traffic and the ways that people are finding their articles about Issue 1 are similar to what we saw last year. And I know as I've been writing my stories, I've been trying to focus on just explaining what it actually does. I want to make sure that people understand. And things like this, you know, last year we voted on abortion rights. That's something that people do have a basic understanding of what that means. But stuff like redistricting, I mean, proportionality, geographical compactness is pretty esoteric. And so they are trying to make it about politicians and whether they're drawing their own districts. I mean, they have these more high-level ways to describe these things, but it's just tough. So it's an open question where this one stands because it's an open question about, I think, how well people understand what's in it.
Like Keith Faber says the current system is not good. Governor DeWine says the current system is not good. They both sit on the Redistricting Commission. Why didn't Republicans present a different system that they would like better than the one that's on the ballot now? They had opportunity to do that.
Yeah, look, I disagree with my good friend Keith Faber and Mike DeWine on this issue because the voters always get it right, whether I agree with them or not. And as Maureen said, 70% of the voters, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, gay, straight, all came together, 70% of the vote twice to come up with our current system. And what happened last year? Democrat leader Allison Russo sat down with Republican Speaker Jason Stephens and the others, and they came up with a unanimous map. This is what the voters of Ohio voted for. 70%. It wasn't 51, 49, 70%. And it worked because Allison Russo, the liberal Democrat leader, said, yes, this is a map, and they all voted for it. Every Democrat voted for it.
They say they
There's
voted
nothing
for
wrong with it.
They
It
voted
works
for
well.
that map because it could have been worse. But go ahead.
The reality of what happened here was that the system that people put in, people thought if the Supreme Court ruled something was unconstitutional, that the legislature would be mature enough to go back and do the right thing. Instead, 7 times they had to say it was unconstitutional, and the legislature just did what they wanted anyways. The bottom line is, as long as a politician is involved in drawing these lines, as long as they hold the crayons, I don't care which party it is, it's not going to be fair. And the thing that I learned in Michigan when they did this is it has become 50-50 districts. It took about 2 terms. And there's a lot more activity. We have non-competitive races in like 60% of our races, Republican and Democrat, where sometimes you don't even have people file to run.
Were there unintended consequences that people didn't expect when they passed the Michigan one?
I think there are unintended consequences anytime, you think that things are contentious now. Well, 60% of your races aren't actually races. So now you've got a fight for control in the legislature at all times. You had a situation in the Rashida Tlaib district, which had been traditionally an African American district. She's obviously of Palestinian descent. and there was a large population in Dearborn. But the question is, would that not have happened even if when her predecessor was in that seat?
Yeah, let me focus that comment there a little bit more. Yes, unintended consequences. According to the federal courts, 13 black districts were wiped out, and 13 black legislators in Michigan got thrown out because of an independent Trojan horse committee. Let's talk about Trojan horses. That's not even answerable to the public. Came up with maps that booted out 13 black Democrats in Michigan. It's the truth. Read the opinion. So you're telling me that this is a public record.
What they did is
Read
they
the
drew
opinion.
even districts. They drew even districts, and some of those districts will be African American again. It's just the way they've drawn it. They're all competitive. People have to run, and sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't.
All right, we'll see what happens here. If you have questions about the election, the process, the candidates, or the issues, WOSU has a great voter guide. You can find it at our website, wosu.org/voter guide. It's a great tool. Check it out. And our next topic, thanks to a variety of factors, Ohio has been losing population clout to other states for decades. Job losses, tax policy, and ubiquitous air conditioning in southern climes have prompted residents of Ohio and other northern states to move south and west. The latest projections from the Ohio Department of Development have even worse news. It projects Ohio will lose nearly 6% of its population by 2050. On average, central Ohio counties will actually see an increase, an 18% increase in population. Those are the blue counties in the middle of the map. But nearly all of the rest of the state will see double-digit declines. Those are the red and deep red counties on this map, and that is not pretty, especially on the eastern side, Brian. Brian, you left Ohio and you came back. Is this just natural attrition that where populations shift over decades because it's warmer, sunnier in the Southwest, or something more than that?
There are some things that you can do. I think part of what has helped Central Ohio and makes it such a unique place in the country, by the way, which is one of the reasons I came back, is that Ohio State University has created a very diverse culture. Families are diverse. Places you live are diverse. I'm in a neighborhood that has Jews, Muslims, Japanese, Chinese are in my neighborhood, and African Americans. And you don't see that often. You see very segregated places. I do think that some of the right-wing rhetoric scares people off. I think some of the extreme stuff does scare younger people away.
Well, people are moving to Texas, and that's a pretty conservative state, and places like that.
Well, Austin's kind of cooled off a bit.
Yeah.
So is Columbus.
Yeah. Mike, on the projections, the city of Columbus and Morpsey, the regional sort of development, community development organization, has double the population increase than what the state does. What do you make of that? Is Central Ohio more optimistic, or where do you get these projections? What do you think of them?
JOBS, 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 jobs. This is where they are. Look, I'm from Northeast Ohio. Others are from Northeast Ohio around this table too. And we came to Columbus because of the opportunities for work, white collar jobs, blue collar jobs, whatever they may be. This is where the work is. And, you know, it'd be great if we could get some more companies to move outside of Central Ohio. It's great to see Intel grow. It's awesome, obviously, but we need to get more strategic placement across the state. You ask 100 people, Mike, you're going to get 100 different answers why our population is declining. You know, we should talk about why are there 22,000 abortions in Ohio every year. I've been president of Ohio Right to Life for 16 years, and we're averaging 20,000 abortions. That's 320,000 human beings that could be here in Ohio. Not all would have stayed, but we could have helped our population that way. Again, one of the reasons why we're seeing a population decline.
In eastern Ohio, along the river, that was pretty stark, those dark red counties there. And that's the fracking boom has slowed or cooled. That has not helped out there.
Yeah, I mean, that part of the state, the economy kind of built up around geographic features like the Ohio River or the presence of coal, you know, that formed manufacturing towns. Things like globalization have caused manufacturing to decline. You know, there's automation, things like that. So it's a tough issue for the eastern part of the state. I know it's not really the intention for policymakers just leave them behind and let people figure it out, but it's a tough question. I mean, and it's something that we've been seeing for a long time. And there's all these other policy issues too, but I think that kind of underlies it. Is that sort of the first thing I mentioned?
So, Brian, is it education? What is there a silver bullet to turn this around?
I do think that if you look, the commonality, and I noticed this when they were trying to put plants in different places when I was in Detroit, the commonality that exists in those places has to do with not only natural resources, good electricity. Tax policy, interestingly enough, isn't as high on it, but universities make a difference. It's skilled workforce and universities and sort of this diversity of population that matters.
All right, time now for our final off-the-record parting shots. And Brian, you go first.
Oh, well, I believe that based on what's happened in Columbus with the transportation issue, that you're going to see in the lame duck, they're going to try to move the transportation school budget out of the into the transportation budget and away from schools.
All right, Michael.
Congratulations to the Cleveland Guardians on an amazing game. My daughter and I went Thursday night, where I think all of Ohio is rooting for Cleveland here leading up to this weekend's series.
It brings people together, doesn't it, Mike?
Amen.
It was a great game. Andrew, also a Guardians fan.
At the risk of stealing your thunder, Mike, I'm not sure what you're going to talk about, but I'm going to the Columbus Marathon on Sunday. I'm not running. I'm going to be wearing my Halloween costume, and I'm going to be delivering refreshments to one of the participants. So if you see a guy wearing a hot dog suit, you know who it is.
I will be out there. I will look for you, and good luck to all those running. I do have one off-the-record comment. J.D. Vance, once again, spread another false rumor this week. This one, though, pretty harmless. He retweeted an article saying Graeter's was selling new Skyline chili-flavored ice cream. Vance jokingly wrote that he and Trump would stop it. Personally, as a fan of Graeter's and not so much a fan of Skyline, I'm glad the idea is just a concept at this point. So no cheese, spaghetti sauce, and noodles flavored ice cream is planned yet. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Continue the discussion on Facebook. Defend Skyline Chili. You can also watch us anytime at our website, wosu.org/COTR, YouTube, and the PBS app. For our crew and panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.